Well, moments ago, the U.S. government announced $250 million in new security assistance for Ukraine. This at an aid meeting in Germany's at its Ramstein air base, where Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky made a rare appearance. It comes at a pivotal moment in the war against Russia. Ukraine recently began its first offensive operations while facing a significant threat back in its Donbass region. For more, we can speak to our correspondent, Gulliver Cragg, standing by. Hello to you, Gulliver. Tell us a little bit more about what Volodymyr Zelensky was hoping to get out of this trip.
Well, I think he's hoping to give it a sort of a boost. I think the word he used was adrenaline by actually showing up in person. The Ukrainians want three things mainly. More weapons, of course, particularly air defense systems and long-range missiles. They also, though, want the weapons that have been promised to be delivered on time. He said that in his remarks that were broadcast. He also said that he would be speaking to the delegates off the record. Maybe that part is more important. But certainly, although he was reading out remarks in English from a piece of paper, and he was still pretty, insistent, Volodymyr Zelensky, about the need for promises to be kept on time. The Ukrainians don't like to give details about which countries aren't delivering what they promised or what exactly has not been delivered, but there is, widespread understanding that a lot of things are delivered late. In February this year, the defense minister, Rustem Umerov, said as much as half of the military equipment that is promised to Ukraine ends up being delivered with significant delays, and some of it without all of the equipment that it needs. In particular, the F-16 planes that Ukraine has recently received apparently don't have the right missiles that they need, and other important parts in order to be able to use them to their full capacity. So that's the sort of second aspect that Volodymyr Zelensky is insisting on. Please keep your promises and keep them on time. He's very much talking about how urgent everything is. And the other thing, of course, that he is going to be insisting on very much, as all the Ukrainian leaders have been talking about for the past few weeks, is they want permission to use longer range weapons to strike targets inside Russia. The lack of understanding in Ukraine is only growing with every week that goes about what the Western allies mean when they talk about fear of escalation and of NATO countries' implication into the conflict. They feel that they proved with their incursion into Kursk region in Russia that Putin's supposed red lines are not really red lines at all. Vladimir Putin, in the eyes of the Ukrainians, is doing all he can, using all the force at his disposal in his campaign against Ukraine. And whether or not the Ukrainians are allowed to use weapons that have a range limit of 100 kilometers or 300 kilometers, that's not going to make a difference in terms of escalation or increased Russian wrath against the West. Though there was another reason that was given yesterday by Sabrina Singh, the Pentagon spokeswoman, as to why the Americans don't want the Ukrainians to use these long-range ATACMS missiles to strike targets further inside Russia. And that, according to her, is that the Americans simply don't have that many of them, and they aren't going to be able to keep resupplying Ukraine with them. And they think that the Ukrainians have more need for them for striking targets in Crimea and other occupied parts of Ukraine.
Yeah, and Gulliver, is a concern on the Ukrainian side about whether this aid will dry up.
Yeah, they're certainly worried. I don't know if they'd say whether it will dry up, but they're worried that it's not coming in fast enough and that it's sort of diminishing. The Germans are talking about cutting the amount of money that they spend on aid to Ukraine. What they've been saying publicly, the Ukrainians, is that they feel that the internal political situation, particularly in very important allied countries like the United States and France, has taken precedence over the Ukrainian situation. There's also Israel. They want their allies to sort of get their eyes back on Ukraine and really be focused on it. Of course, they're very worried about the US elections and what's going to happen after that. They want to get as much help as they can before that. But it's also just because the situation is getting worse in Ukraine by the day. The Russians are really advancing rapidly in Donbass. Their ability to continue striking targets far from the front line pretty much every single night means that the Russians have got more capacity to produce and acquire missiles than the Ukrainians thought they had. That's a very worrying development. We've seen with the recent strikes on Lviv that even very major Ukrainian cities are not fully protected by air defenses.